Hello everyone and welcome back. So when I first started doing videos on YouTube, I found that I could just wing the details, right? And just kind of keep talking. But I found when I was going back and editing that I was throwing out a lot of my footage because I just could ramble on and on and on about this. So I am going to try to script a little bit of this just to help you guys stick around as we go ahead and go for some targets up here in the northern skies. So I have the telescope still tarped here because it was sunny out. I just didn't want the sun to really impact this. So good news is though, we're finally back. It's been a little bit since I posted my last video, but I hope you guys are expecting something special because I think I've got something special for you. We're finally back at it after some clouds, right? I've unfortunately had some cloud coverage come in and that I couldn't prevent that. But tonight we're gonna revisit a target that I once shot last year, or no, 2 years ago now, and it was when I first got into the hobby essentially. So it's cataloged as NGC 7000, so it's actually a fairly easy one to remember. It's also known as the North America Nebula. A lot of people get this wrong. It's not the North American Nebula, it's the North America. So we're encompassing Canada, the United States, and Mexico, also with the Gulf inside of this named nebula. So that's how it got its name, because it does look like that, and I'll try to illustrate how much it looks like that on the final image. The North American Nebula is an emission nebula, which can be found in the constellation of Cygnus. Just like all other nebulas, it's glowing due to the ionization of interstellar gas as a result of radiation being emitted from nearby young hot stars. So now this particular nebula is located somewhere about 1700 light years away from us here on Earth. It does span the radius of roughly 100 light years. So again, remember, our solar system, which we haven't even exited with Voyager 1, is only about 1.1 to 1.2 light years, as some recent studies would suggest. Now, this nebula does have a cosmic neighbor in the Pelican Nebula, so it is a wonderful target. If you have a really short focal length telescope, you can get both of these nebulae within a single shot. Unfortunately, I didn't visit the Pelican Nebula this year, and we're kind of too late for my particular skies just because of these massive trees that are actually behind you. And Cygnus does get down low for me about 2 o'clock in the morning, so unfortunately at about 2 o'clock I'm pretty much done imaging within that particular span. The North America Nebula was first observed in 1786, if you can believe that. It was discovered by William Herschel, a name that you probably heard before at least a time or two, given how many things he has founded. This nebula is actually pretty spectacular in the sense that we have multiple options when it comes to the different color palettes we can use for it. We can use everything from RGB to HOO to SHO. And now, if you're not familiar with what HOO and SHO means, I've talked about it in a number of videos, but it's essentially the filters we use and how we combine them with the red, blue, and green color channels inside of post-processing. The nebula is bright enough you could actually do just an RGB version of it, which is pretty spectacular because not all nebulas will allow for such a thing. In our case, we're going to be shooting all narrowband, so SHO, and I'm going to do some tone mapping, I think, with it and get a sense of what it looks like when we really stretch that nebulosity and leave our stars alone. So we're going to definitely try to do that, but doing SHO also gives us the flexibility of doing HOO because we've already shot hydrogen and oxygen data on that target over here. Which is going to pass over the north behind these trees that you see behind me here, and it's going to come across. And because we're shooting SHO again, I can build an HOO image. So with one essential data set, I can create 2 separate images. I think I'm only going to focus on one for now. We'll see what we actually get. So now I talked about broadband and narrowband spectrum. So for those of you not familiar with what that actually means, we look at the colors by their wavelengths. So just like when you use a prism, you can see the colors of the rainbow. It's the same thing. It's what wavelength these particular colors hit. It typically goes from around 400 upwards to about 800 before you start dipping into the ultraviolet and infrared spectrums, which we don't typically get an image with our particular cameras because they're really not geared for that. Now you can get traces of it. Your stars can bloat as a result of ultraviolet and infrared. I also use the infrared cut filter because I have outdoor cameras here that use infrared light, so I can see you, but you may not be able to see me. So broadband means that we're looking at a very long spectrum of light. So red's going to be really wide, blue will be wide, and they do crossover, as well as green will cut into the blue as well. So we're looking at a very long spectrum of the entire visible spectrum, whereas broadband is going to be little tiny slivers of red, blue, and then also red again, because hydrogen and sulfur are actually both within the red color spectrum, but we assign hydrogen to green because it helps build that contrast when we get to the post-processing. That's where it gets its name, though, is the Hubble palette, because NASA needed a way to give their nebulas more contrast, and that's where this comes from. So when I use 3 nanometers, so it's about as tight as you can physically get on the general market. I don't even know if they make filters that shoot even less than 3, because that's incredibly narrow. But what it does is it really helps me isolate hydrogen specific colors, sulfur specific colors, and of course oxygen specific wavelengths of color. And that way when I go to associate them later, I know I'm looking at that specific element. I've had a lot of people tell me, how do you know what element you're looking at? Couldn't you just be making this up? End of the day, I guess you could, but there's nothing to benefit by that. We know the light spectrum, that can be proven scientifically, and we're only cutting just a little tiny slice of the pie with regards to that color spectrum, and that's how we know that hydrogen is red. So we will be using this telescope, which is the Explore Scientific 127 with the 0.8 reducer down to 666 millimeters of focal length. We're gonna spend, I don't know, at least one night, probably 2 nights shooting this target, and we'll get final numbers at the very end of the image. I don't know just yet how long I'm gonna be imaging this for before we get it completed. So thank you very much for sticking around with me for the amount of time that you already have. I'm gonna keep this one relatively short. So let's go ahead and get the final image. If you like what you saw today, please be sure to subscribe, smash that thumbs up, like the channel, follow the channel. That way you also get notified when I post new videos. If you're interested with planetary, I do want to try to do some planetary imaging this fall, so bear with me on that one just yet. We do need to wait for the planes to get just a little higher in the night sky, so it actually might be another month or 2. With that, until next time, clear skies, and we'll see you next time.